This conference will now be recorded.
So in today's class, we will focus on developing OData web service using create deep entity method, developing OData web service using create deep entity method. So create deep entity method is used to insert header record along with its corresponding item records. We can use create deep entity method. Create deep entity method can be used to insert header records along with its corresponding item records. So this create deep entity method is exactly opposite to the previous scenario which we have implemented using get expanded entity method. So in last scenario, we have understood how to use get expanded entity method. Get expanded entity method, and that is used to fetch header record along with its corresponding items. Get expanded entity method, which we have implemented in last scenario, that is to fetch header record along with its corresponding item records. But in today's session, we will focus on create deep entity method in order to insert header record simultaneously along with its corresponding item records. So these two methods are exactly opposite to each other. Create a deep entity method is opposite to get expanded entity method. Just remember this, create deep entity method is exactly opposite to get expanded entity method. So create deep entity method contains some important parameters. So one of the main parameter is IO data provider. And I think there is one more parameter, ER entity, but this is optional. Create deep entity method contains two important parameters, IO data provider and ER entity. So IO data provider, we can use this to accept input header record. In today's scenario, we are going to accept input header record along with its corresponding items from front-end app. something like UI5 or Fiori. You can accept input header record along with its corresponding input item records from the front-end app UI5 or Fiori. And you can use ER entity in case if you want to send, this is optional, in case if you want to send output back to front-end application, UI5 or Fiori. You can use ER entity in order to send the output, for example, header plus its items back to the front-end application. Then you can use ER entity parameter here. So sending the output by using create deep entity method is not mandatory. In case if you want to send the same output back to the front end, only then you try to use ER entity. So let us understand with step-by-step procedure. So step 1 is very simple. Try to open your OData service project, which is created for last scenario. So in the same project which is created in the last scenario, that project we are going to open it. And step 2, make sure that principal entity type and dependent entity type is available. So in the last scenario, we have already done this. You need not do it again, but just for procedure wise, I'm writing here. Make sure that principal entity type, dependent entity type is available under data model. Step 3, make sure that principal entity set and dependent entity set is available under data model. So in the last scenario, we have also created principal entity set, dependent entity set in data model. So we need not do it again. Just for procedure wise, I'm trying to write it here. And step 4, you can create association, maintain referential constraint, and create association set. Association, referential constraint, association set. So these things are also created in the last scenario. The same thing we can use it again for today's scenario. And step 5, generate runtime artifacts. So this is already done. You need not do it again because step 2, step 3, step 4, that is related to data model that is already available. So runtime artifacts, you need not change it. Step 6, make sure that get expanded entity method is implemented. Get expanded entity method must be implemented in order to test create deep entity method. If you want to test directly, create deep entity method. For testing purpose, make sure that get expanded entity method is also implemented. And this method we have already implemented in the last session, so you need not worry again. So it's already implemented. For last scenario, we can proceed further. Step 7 is now open data provider extension class, DPC extension, click change, place cursor under create deep entity method. Place cursor under create deep entity method and click on redefine. Redefine that method if you want to implement the code. After redefining, you can implement below code. So you can save and activate. Step 8, you can open service maintenance. Open gateway client and test the service. So we are going to write some piece of code under create deep entity method by following the opposite process which we have implemented for get expanded entity method. So let me do these things. You can see this is our project which we have created for get expanded entity method. And you can see principal entity type, dependent entity type is available. And you can see principal entity set, dependent entity set is available. And you can see association is available here. And the referential constraint, that's a common field. We have already done this. And now you can see there is association set that is also created here. So up to step 6, these are common for last scenario and today's scenario. Now you directly focus on create deep entity method implementation. So all these things are already available. So directly go to DPC extension class. Under DPC extension class, you need to click on change. So scroll down. Somewhere here you can find something like create deep entity method here. Create deep entity. It is to execute a deep insert. Deep insert is nothing but header record plus its corresponding item. So that can be a deep insert. So let me take this screenshot here. Just click on redefine. Right, so let me just save this. method. So please cursor here, redefine. Now you can see, in this case, we are going to write some piece of code. There is something like IO data provider. You can see this. This is one of the importing parameter for this method. You can use IO data provider in order to accept header place its corresponding items from the front-end application. This is a main parameter in today's session, and you can use ER deep entity if you want to send this input as output back to the front end. Then you can also use ER deep entity parameter. In case if you want to send the same input what you got from front end, I want to send it as output back to the front end. So in that case you can use ER deep entity here. Let me correct. ER deep entity. So that's the actual parameter name. ER deep entity, that's an optional parameter, but you can send output header place its items back to the front end app after inserting the data in the database tables. So we are going to use IO data provider for accepting input header record along with its corresponding item records. So if you want to accept header place its items, then you need to make use of a deep structure. Inside deep structure, you should accommodate header as well as items. Same like what we have done in the last session. So here we are going to write the code. First, let me declare all the variables. Let me declare all the variables here. So first data statement, let me use begin of structure, and I want to include another structure. Include type ZCL. You can use your MPC class, and you need to accommodate header. You need to accommodate header record, so that's the reason why you can use table structure header here. TS user header in our case.
Pikachu.
And similarly, on expansion, we need to use navigation property, so we can use data statement within that structure. For example, np on user ID. You can use type. Use type ZCL MPC class. Your MPC class. And here you need to accommodate collection of items on expanding navigation property. You need to accommodate collection of items on expanding navigation property, so try to refer with table type, TT items. That means TT user items in this case. And now you can use something like end of structure. So if you closely observe this particular code, Within this structure, what we are trying to do is we are trying to include single header and we are trying to include multiple items. TS user header can accommodate single header record. TT user items can accommodate collection of item records. So this is technically the format for accepting the input from the front end into our OData service. We are going to use this particular format in order to accept input from the front end into OData service. Now what you can do is you can declare one work area with ls deep type. You can use structure st or you can use like stru underscore exp. So that is our work area here, and this work area will resemble our deep structure. That means this particular structure. We are declaring work area as ls deep, which will resemble the above structure, which is technically a deep structure here. Now what you need to do is you can use something like work area for header record as something like, let me use work area user header, type our first table, that is Z user info table. So why? Because this is the table which we are trying to use it for header data. This is a database table. We have used it for storing header data. So try to declare one work area for header with Z user info table. And then we need something like internal table for items. Internal table for items. For example, IT user items, type table of Z user details, because this is the table which will store item data here. Z user details is the table which will store item data at database table level. So I'm using type table of Z user details table for declaring internal table for items. So first one we have taken work area for header. In second case we have taken internal table for items. Why? Because our input which comes from the front end will have single header and collection of items. So we have used work area for header, internal table for items. Similarly, better use work area for items. This is to manage the coding part. You can refer with type ZCL MPC class with table structure user items. This is technically to manage our coding part so that we can extract collection of items into each work area here, ls user item here. This is for internal purpose. Now the most important is which parameter will help you to get header plus items. As I told you in the very beginning, we have to use IO data provider here. IO data provider, you can use it and use read entry data method to get the complete header plus its items from front end to OData service. So we can use something like, okay, we have to use that parameter IO data provider. IO data provider, and then read entry data and importing ES data into something like ls deep. This is work area for our deep structure. This is work area for deep structure format. So whichever header plus its items are coming from front end, that will ultimately reach this particular ls deep here. From this ls deep, you can extract your header and you can extract your collection of items. And header record you can insert into first table, item records you can insert into second table. But ls deep internally contains the input in the form of header plus items, and that we are trying to capture inside our data service. So now what you need to do, what you can do is ls deep hyphen, you can see it contains header fields, all these header fields, and you can see there is one more option, navigation property on user ID for accommodating collection of items. So ls deep in this case contains the fields of header data, plus it contains navigation property on user ID, which means on expanding you can get its items. So first we'll try to extract header record from that. Header record, that is header record first field user ID, and that I want to populate inside work area user header hyphen user ID. Similarly, the same thing, ls deep hyphen, let me capture first name and try to put it into local work area for header with first name.
Pikachu!